What if you hit rock bottom and it's not enough? What do you do? Welcome to CWS Christian Writing and Speaking. I'm your host, Jackie Wilson. And today's guest was a bartender in Las Vegas, and every night he had his own stage. But it wasn't the stage in front of the people that led to his demise. It was what was happening behind the stage. It fed his addiction. By grace, he started his recovery journey. And you can hear his story in his book, Man Up, Sober Up. And besides being an author, he is also a new husband and father of a new baby boy. Let's welcome to the CWS stage, Mr. Ryan Penley. Welcome,
Thank you very
Ryan.
much.
So I'm
I
looking forward
appreciate it.
to hearing your story because I love this thought. Um, you had your own stage being a bartender, and if anybody has any awareness of the world, we know like how it is when you have conversations with people at the bar. You're meeting new people every night. People are there to have a good time, and you're putting on this show at the bar. But like you said, it wasn't necessarily what was happening in front. It was what was happening behind the scenes. And I want to know what was happening behind the scenes, but also what led you to starting going down this road of addiction. Usually there's something that's happened. And so what happened? What is the story?
Yeah. So, Jackie, everything seemed to be going well. Now looking back, right, things are different. Hindsight is 2020. And at the time, though, I felt like I was doing well, right? And I consider this to be the stage of my life that it was still me. I got this. It was always like I got this. This is before the Lord, right? Well, before I had developed a relationship, so it was a whole lot of me, very ego, a lot of confidence that I felt was coming from myself. So I'm moving along in life, and I think that things are going well. However, I'm consuming copious amounts of alcohol. I'm partaking in drugs and partying, and however, I still have a job. I still had friends. I still had a little bit of money in the bank. I was going to school. So like I felt like that was enough. I felt like that was enough to, solidify or at least qualify for like, oh, okay, I'm good. However, like you had pointed out, there was creeping up. The drug use, the alcohol, it was ramping up. And I kind of at times, try to mitigate it. I try to kinda slow it down at times. However, you it was increasing, and my situation started to change. Physically and emotionally, it started to get a larger hold on me. So when I'm considering this time period, we're looking at about, like, I'd say 8 years. It wasn't instantaneous, and I think that many times drug addiction, or alcoholism, it doesn't just show up, and it's like you go from having 2 beers to, you know, completely drunk out of your mind, losing your job, all your family, and your health, right? It's a slow build typically. I think especially with alcohol because we consider alcohol a social lubricant, if you will. We enjoy drinks at a bar to meet new people, to have conversations and laughs. And for many people, that's a possibility. For myself, that's not a possibility, and I know that now. So you asked for the particular turning point, if you will, and I think a lot of people close to me that know me the best and that were there the most. It was when I was injured and I had broken my leg and went to a doctor, and that doctor he had prescribed me like enough painkillers to like kill a rhinoceros. I was like, I mean, he loaded me up. And looking back, it's like that period of time, and this is happening a lot in the country, is happening a lot in different doctors' offices, is the opioid epidemic, I believe is a real thing. And so that point when I was prescribed those pills, and now not only did I have a lot of drugs at my possession, it was also I had this green light. Oh, this is your medicine. This is, and I would tell people, I'm high as a kite, and I'm like, oh, well, the doctor said I'm supposed to take this. And in reality, objectively, I was developing drug addiction, and I was binding wholeheartedly to that addict's mindset, and it started to become a reality. So that would be, I would imagine, if I could say that there was a milestone at that point in Las Vegas, that was it. I was just handed over a bunch of pills, and I think that really was a turn for the worse.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the first part of what you said. It's like you had the perfect mask, but behind the scenes, you were doing all of these other things. And I think there are a lot of people who have it looks like they have the perfect life on the outside. Like you said, you're doing well, you were in school, you were holding down a full-time job. But behind the scenes, it was like, man, I'm drinking a little extra here, a little extra there. I would like to know what was part of the buildup with the alcohol. Was it just the socialization with friends, or were you trying to keep some sort of pain in check? Was it that you were happy or unhappy?
It's so sneaky, right? Because when I think about your question, and I'm trying to think about my mindset, I think my mindset when I'm much younger, like say my first few drinks, it was, as I had mentioned before, it's a social lubricant. I mean, I had a couple beers. I was young. I was like 14, 15, and I all of a sudden had enough confidence to talk to pretty girls. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, this is amazing. And so at that point, I'm feeling zero repercussions, and I'm seeing nothing but upside. And then you fast forward to Las Vegas. I'm in Las Vegas. I'm still carrying on this social element of what's happening, and things are going well with little dabbles of excess. Blacking out, not really remembering what I had done in its entirety. Things got a little foggy. I may have said some inappropriate things. I may have done some inappropriate things. So those started to sneak in. So now the repercussions are increasing. So I'm still having fun, if you will. I'm still, and the repercussions are growing. However, I'm choosing to ignore them. Now, I think that your question is bound to like maybe like an issue of trauma or pain, and I would like to believe that that didn't develop until later, because I think that as that relationship of, see, social engagement and then normal drinking turns into excessive drinking, turns into, well, if we just fast forward that a little bit later, now at a point I began to drink just to become normal. So, I mean, that is, of course, in the deeps and the depths of addiction. Is like, okay, I'm shaking because I don't have any alcohol. Okay, I have to have a drink to now become normal. So it starts to become a coping mechanism, not just mentally and emotionally, but also biologically, right? And so that's the furthest development that you can really get to. Now, again, I think you're asking a question about like, was I dealing with some underlying traumas? And at that point, I mean, nothing particular sticks out. I mean, I imagine like a therapeutic professional might disagree. I'm no different than most people. There are elements of my history, my childhood, and things of that nature that might be lurking as a true cause, if you will. But I didn't necessarily think of anything. I wasn't at that point when I was in Las Vegas. I don't believe I was like really trying to bury anything deep down that I can really note, right? That I can really express. So, but and that doesn't change the fact that it becomes like a coping mechanism for most alcoholics, and then eventually becomes out of control.
But I think you said something that was key. And sometimes it's not so much as, you do have this dramatic trauma in your background. You started drinking to be social with your friends. You were just fitting in with your friends, something really small. You were fitting in with your friends, and then you noticed that it had an effect on you. What drove it is because you liked the effect that it had on you. I feel more confident. And because you felt more confident, the things that you said you did or said or that may have been appropriate, you had the confidence to even do those things.
Mm,
So it
mhm.
drove this need that you had. Like I said, it may not be this deep rooted. trauma or anything like that, but there was a desire that you had, and your desire was, I wanted to be more confident. And so I found out that alcohol helped me be that way. And then we go fast forward to you breaking your leg, and then you have this prescription from the doctors. And like you said, it's like he gave you so much. And the first question that popped in my head, did he ask about whether or not you had a drug issue? Was that something that you hid? And when was he thinking about that when he gave you that much pain medication? And then you use that as a part of just a part of the whole system of what you already were doing.
Well, it's funny that well, it's not funny, but it's, ironic, I guess, that you mentioned, the whole system at that point in time, and this is around 2008, 2009, is so corrupt. It was so corrupt, in fact, that I remember being in this doctor's office, and I remember seeing, people going through withdrawals. And we're all there for the same reason. We all had insurance. I had great insurance. I mean, I only paid $5 for all of these drugs, $5 total. And I remember so part of it was like he had to drug test me. And I failed this drug test. I could not tell you how many times. And I'm talking for cocaine. Like he had to come and address it. And he's like, hey, listen, I can't give you these pills because you are testing positive for other illegal narcotics. I'm not allowed to. And I was like, oh, really? And he like let me get off on this. I don't know, several times. And so at that point, the system was so corrupt. And now I do want to say this wholeheartedly. I mean, this is the truth. I still take responsibility. And I think that it's a large part of me getting better or gaining traction in recovery is because I don't blame this doctor. I don't blame the system. It just it's what it was. It's what happened, and it's unfortunate. However, I know now that if I hadn't taken responsibility, because at the end of the day, that doctor wasn't putting the drugs into my body, I was, and so that it was a rather tough time, hence all the publicity that the opioid epidemic gets these days is because I'm not alone. There's a lot of people that were in the same circumstances.
Yeah, and like you said, it was cheaper than buying drugs off the street. You got an automatic high off of it. I mean, you're feeling comfortable at this point. But in taking responsibility, you actually became an advocate for your health, even beyond, what that doctor did. And that is such an important part of it. So let's move into your recovery process. One of the things that I love that you talked about is how you were reading scripture every day. You had a particular goal and you actually exceeded that goal quite a bit. How did that influence your recovery?
Well, first I'd like to kind of touch on like a dear friend of mine, who's we had been friends since childhood, and he had seen the whole thing, and he had seen me here at my worst, and he's a very large part of me becoming a believer. And I would see him, and he would come and meet with me occasionally. Still knew that I was struggling, and he didn't push scripture. He didn't say, "Hey, read this, or you're gonna die or go to hell." He didn't do any of that. He just would be around me, and he would just tell me, well, I got better, and my life got better once I started reading scripture. And he must have told me this, but not like he was never selling it. I would just like inquire, like, oh man, well, how do you got all this stuff together? You have a family? And he would say, well, hey man, I started reading scripture. And because of how close he was to me, I thought, all right, there's got to be some wisdom in this book, because I also believe that something doesn't make it thousands of years and hundreds of generations and all of that. It doesn't work unless there's truth in there. So initially I approached it as like a manual. Like, okay, this is a manual to get better. These are the early stages of my belief, of course. And so I think God worked through that method, right? He used my friendship, and he used my proclivity for like logic and things of that nature to expose me to scripture. And then as I had read and continued to read, and you mentioned about the goal was for a year, every day for a year. And I ended up reading like I think it was like 530 some odd days in a row of scripture. And once I started getting a few of these days under my belt, I started getting some months in there, it started working, and I think anybody who is, I would imagine all believers out there know when it starts working. When he starts working, he like really starts, putting boots to ground in your soul. It's like, it's undeniable. So yeah, that's kind of like that process of how I kind of worked into developing a habit of scripture.
Yeah, and I love it. I mean, you said something that's so important, and it was the way that your friend was dealing with you. He wasn't saying, "You're going to hell, you're going to hell." He wasn't trying to shove it down your throat. He just really just told his testimony. This is what I'm doing, and this is what is working. And it made you curious. And then you wanted to step into it because you were curious about it, not necessarily for the religious aspect of things that we would think of, but it drew your attention. Said, "Well, let me check this out." And I love that. And another thing that you said that I love is God used your logic. And I think a lot of times people forget God starts working with us right where we are. And I think the Apostle Paul is a great example of that. Is he's working with you right where you are. So you don't have to be someone who's gone to church all your life and you're doing all these quote unquote great things. Wherever you are in the process, God will meet you there. So I absolutely love that. And I'm sure now, as you encounter people, you probably take a similar approach in that you just share what your story is. It's not, I'm telling you, you have a better choice. It's more of that. And, instead of saying, I'm telling you what you need to do,
Mm.
because that part of it is so important. I feel like in the conversion process and drawing people to Christ. And a lot of times we're the ones that are trying to quote unquote save them, but we're only are the ones that are supposed to be telling people about him, and then he does the saving.
Yeah, and that's actually been an inquiry of my wife about my newborn son and about how we approach alcohol. And I told her, I don't intend on telling him, "You better not drink." I'm not even going to, like, I'm gonna say, "This is what happened to me when I drank. This is what can happen to you. Here's where I am at now." I'm just gonna be transparent and lead by example. That's all. And honestly, that's, 'cause my grandmother, she was a believer, but she was very much so, "You're going to hell." It was like, not much explanation. It was just like, you better believe in Jesus or you're going to hell." I'm like, "Oh," so it was like, it was hard. I wanted to know more. And so that, as much as she cared and as much as she believed in Jesus, she wasn't like super articulate. She still had all the beliefs. It's just, it came across and it was very much so like, "You better or this is going to happen." And it was like, sometimes that's a tough lesson to understand.
Yeah. And I do want to touch on one thing I mentioned in your introduction, which is the rock bottom on it was like you hit rock bottom, but then it still was not enough. What happened there?
Well, because when I when I tell people some of these stories, and I'll see their faces change on just one element or one variable. So I'll just like go over them. I go over them quickly for the sake of brevity. Because it's a lot going on. Hence why I wrote a book. So like, I was in a diabetic coma that I had created through drug abuse and alcoholism. I was wanted in 3 different states all at the same time. I had to go through each state and kinda do like a tour of turning myself in and making things right because I had let things get out of control. My mother accused me of, trying to murder her. She's not well, and she's suffering from addiction and alcoholism currently, and I pray for her. And, however, so I'd been, put in jail by my own mother, all these different things. I was homeless for a while. There was so many milestones that objectively, you look and you say, "Come on, man, that is rock bottom." And then so I always make the comment like, I was never sure I was there. People are always like, "Oh, that's when you turned it around, right?" I'm like, "Well, not necessarily. I continued to destroy myself for another 3 years, or I continued to explore the very stone bottom of this dark, dark pit, right? So I'm, when it seems a little over the top how bad things had gotten, and I know some people had seen it worse, and I understand. However, objectively, I looked around, so it was never just a moment. I was just kind of like, man, things have gotten completely awful. And there was no arguing. A lot of times you hear like, "Oh, well, admitting you have a problem is the first step." Now, there's a lot of truth in that, of course, but there was no argument for me not knowing that I had a problem, right? So it was call me stubborn, call me whatever you will. I mean, because you're probably accurate in saying such things. I made sure that it was undeniable, by several milestones, not just a single one. So it was never just like a pivot, like off of the bottom. It was like I just kept kind of tumbling and tumbling. And then eventually I started climbing the other way, which is also a seemingly pretty slow crawl in the right direction.
But I think it's important that you point out it is a process. People think that, oh man, I made an acknowledgement that I'm doing something that's not quite right. But you've built up these habits. And so you have to start breaking these habits as well. And so it takes longer to break a habit than to form a habit. And so
Mhm.
if it took you another 3 years, it's not actually surprising. But a lot of times we're thinking, oh, well, you should already be, but it's a process, just like our Christian journey. We're not getting it all at the same time. It is a process. God builds on each lesson that we learn. Now, talking about your book, because you do talk about this in your book, Man Up, Sober Up, what else can people find in the book itself?
It's a mixture of some of these milestones packaged as stories, and so there's a bit of entertainment, I suppose, right? Then there's also a bit of authority. So somebody who may not think that I understand maybe some of those stories can show that I'm able to resonate. Now that's for purpose. That's not just so they can feel like other people had gone through bad things. It's so that the tactics that I follow each story up with, right? So there's all these steps, and each one is an element and strategy that I found that worked for me. Now, what am I saying that will work for everyone? Of course not. Is it kind of a modge podge of several strategies from people much wiser than myself? Yes, it is. And so I had kind of just shared what I had built together that worked for me, meaning it's a framework to start moving in the right direction. If you find yourself looking around saying the same thing to yourself that I said to myself, or like, okay, this is bad. Like things have gotten bad, and I'm ready for it to be better. So that's where. So it's the stories, and each behind each story is a tactic and a strategy that I know or I feel works.
Yeah. And what have the responses been from people as far as what have they found the most helpful within your book?
I'll share like this is a very moving conversation I just had with a buddy of mine who's still in Las Vegas. And he called me up and he had mentioned like, oh hey man, I just I read your book, and I don't he wasn't even quite finished with it. He just said, I've been reading your book, and his mother read my book, and so he started off telling me like, you know, which you find a lot of people that have a problem. Sometimes they go the roundabout way to let you know what's really happening. So he says, "Oh, hey, I just want to let you know that I set up a meeting with my sisters and my mother." And I'm like, "Okay," and so we keep talking, catching up, and then he says, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I started getting honest with myself, and I'm gonna let them know about the pills I've been taking and my gambling." Now, he's a gentleman, he's a good friend of mine that what ironically, he's also the guy that broke my leg, but that's a whole other story. That's a whole other thing. So he he never hit rock bottom. He has got his job, he's got his son, they have a roof over their head, they eat and all of these things. However, he's like limping along. He's taking these narcotics and he's kind of limping along. And so it's never came tumbling down for him. But he read the book and he started realizing, well, okay, I didn't end up in the hospital, I didn't go to jail, but my life can be a lot better. And he started observing himself, and that's in the start of the book, is that creating enough distance from yourself to really see how your behaviors are really unfolding in the world and becoming honest with where you're at, right? He had done that part, and he said, I don't like the way it looks. And so he called me to share that, he was gonna make some moves. He's going to make some changes. And that just it moved me so much to see somebody that's close to me, and I know his situation and his drug use and all this stuff rather well. And to know that it had been going on for so long, and for him to finally say, "Hey, this isn't okay," despite not, despite not really hitting rock bottom, but knowing, okay, well, I may not be there yet, but I might as well get better. And so that just it meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to me to see somebody making some changes, especially somebody that I love. I've had a lot of people reach out about the book. They aren't, they might be fans or they're readers, but this is a person that I care for deeply and emotionally. I care for him deeply, and so to see him get better for his family is a blessing that's beyond belief.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned to me before we hit record was the fact that it's not a Christian book, but does it have to have the overtones of Christianity to still be a book of witness? And you're not only sharing what you did so that you could move forward, which is what God definitely wants us to do. But if somebody wants to have an additional conversation with you, you have opened the door, and so you are meeting people where they are. You
Mhm.
truly are. So there are different ways that God will allow us to use our talents, gifts, abilities, and experiences to bring people toward Him. And that may be the first step for Him is just reading your book. And like you said, taking a step back and looking at your life from a distance to see what is really going on in your life. So I absolutely love that. What is next for you?
That's an excellent question, and I haven't quite got it off the ground yet, but I'm going to start my own podcast, and it's being with lovely people like yourself and having these moments, and I have found, and this is something I pray about this a lot. I pray to the Lord to show me excitement, because I think that comes from Him, right? Because how do when something you look at something, you're like, oh wow, oh that's cool, and you like want to look at it. What does that? Well, where does that come from, right? Where does that when you read something or you hear something, and it moves you just a little bit to where you're like, I kind of want more of that thing. Where does that kind of force come from? I think for me, because I focus on it, is it comes from the Lord. So I've prayed for Him to show me my excitement. I'm kind
Mhm.
of an excited kind of person, so I get worked up, and I prayed for him to use that, right? And podcasting and doing these shows and talking with lovely people like yourself, it's piqued my interest, and then therefore what's worked for me, even with the book, was I've leaned into it. So here's the Lord saying, hey, check this out. And I'm like, man, you know what? That's kind of cool. And then so here I am. I'm moving forward with that, and yeah, that would be the next little adventure on my, well, other than my son and my wife, who's brand new. Is it? Yeah, the podcasting would be the next venture.
Yeah, I love it. How can people connect with you and where can they find your book?
It's on Amazon. You can go to my website, ryanpenley.org. There's a link to buy it. There's also a link, an author contact link, so people can go to that form. It's just email. You can email me. I'll get back to you. So and that's kind of where it's at. Then I'm also on Facebook. It's My Rock Bottom Recovery. That's my page. It's a nice community, people sharing success stories about addiction recovery, things of that nature. So yeah, it's My Rock Bottom Recovery on Facebook, and then ryanpenley.org is my website.
Wonderful, wonderful. As we wrap up your interview, what is the one thing that you want to leave with the audience? The one thing that they can take action on today?
It's take action, right? Not to say what you had just but let me kind of expand on that, right? The sooner you make a move, the sooner you make a mistake, and then you correct it, right? And I call these iterations. So if you wait, nothing changes. And so my best advice is really start humbly, start small, but start. And even plan on making a mistake. because by the time you correct that mistake and try again, somebody else might be waiting like a whole month, right? And they haven't done anything. And you don't want to be that person. It's like writing. Ernest Hemingway, he says your first draft is like shh, right? It's like it is intended to be that way. It's intended to be horrible. Like, so when you do something for the first time, that's all right, but do something. And that's my best advice for everybody to take action today is just make a tiny move in one direction and make it a good direction, right? And then you're on your way already.
Yeah, I love it. CWS audience, you have heard him. So many golden nuggets throughout this entire interview. Some of the things that just stood out to me were, your witness does not have to be so blatant. It can be just your testimony of what it is that you did to change your life. Also, I love the fact that he pointed out through his interview that, God can use you right where you are. Those personality traits that you have, God will use all of that for his glory. So you don't have to think, oh, I got to be this different person. I got to be like this person or that person. Be yourself and then let God work that out for you. He will show you how he will use that to build in his kingdom. And just also just be willing to acknowledge where you are in your situation. Sometimes the rock bottom for one person is not the rock bottom for you, but could your life be better? Ask yourself that question. And like Ryan said, if it can be better, then what action will you take today to ensure that it is better next week, next month, next year? But if you just sit there, nothing will be better. You will be in the same place the next month and the month after that. And before you know it, a year will have passed. So that is your challenge. Look at where you are in life. Could your life be better? And if the answer is yes, start taking those steps to make it better, to be where you know you're supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Has just been a blessing to me. And I just pray that you keep in your heart what was said here today. Let it just marinate in your heart and move better in life. Until next time, beautiful people, God bless.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Thanks again, and see you next time.